Welcome to the U.S. Manufacturing Today podcast, your hub of information about the U.S. manufacturing and distribution industry. Brought to you by Variable, the on-demand labor solution revitalizing and optimizing your operation, enabling just-in-time response to demand, more efficient production, and lower cost per unit. And now your host and head of reindustrialization at Variable, Matt Horine.
Welcome back to U.S. Manufacturing Today, the podcast powered by Variable, where we talk with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers shaping the future of American industry, along with providing regular updates on the state of manufacturing, the changing landscape, policies, and more. Today's guest brings a perspective we don't get often enough in manufacturing conversations, and someone who sits at the intersection of operations, venture capital, and long-term economic strategy. Renan Devillieres is a founder and CEO of OSS Ventures, a venture studio focused on building and investing in technology companies specifically for manufacturing and operations. Before that, Renan worked as an economist at OECD, co-founded startups internationally, and has spent years helping organizations navigate the accelerating pace of technological change. Renan's work is grounded in a simple but powerful idea. Manufacturing is still the backbone of real economic sovereignty, but the way we build, invest, and scale industrial technology must evolve. Today, we'll talk about how startups are reshaping manufacturing, how capital is flowing or misfiring in industrial tech, why sustainability and resilience matter more than hype, and what investors and operators need to understand as we look ahead. Renan, welcome to U.S. Manufacturing Today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
We're very excited to have you on the show today, and I think there's a lot to talk about from the macro standpoint, but first and foremost, want to get into it a little bit about your background and what you're doing. You've had a pretty diverse path, an economist, a startup founder, venture studio builder. How did you first become interested in manufacturing and operations specifically?
So it was basically by pure luck. I did 2 years at the OECD and I was an economist, but I was classically trained as a mathematician and data scientist. I figured out that long-term economy and blah, blah wasn't for me because it was too long. So I went to McKinsey & Company. And at McKinsey & Company, they took me as thing from my math background. I couldn't read the P&L. The very first mission that I was given was literally some guy saying, hey, I have that gigantic organization. I need to redo the supply chain. I need someone who's good at math. And they were like, that new guy seemed to be good at math. And I knew nothing about factories, nothing about manufacturing, but I just fell in love. And I fell in love. It was like 8 weeks of hardcore mathematics and supply chain and everything. And I just fell in love with manufacturing and I couldn't go back after that. So I made my whole career in operation and manufacturing, basically.
Wow, that's really good exposure. And the on-the-ground P&L math sometimes is a little different than mathematics. I won't out myself here, not a math student myself, but do enjoy manufacturing. How did your time at the OECD shape how you think about industrial policy, productivity, and long-term economic resilience?
I have only 2 modes now, which is either you think on the global stage with like 20 to 30 years horizons, or you think there next quarter and you're on the shop floor. And I think it is the correct way of looking at a manufacturing company because there's no midterm anymore. And so OECD helped me having that very long-term, very globalized vision. Because like, even if you're a small shop owner in Alabama, you need to be thinking that the dependency to China is going down and how it affects your business, even if you're like a 30 people operation.
It certainly does. The compacting of the global supply chain, I think everybody's felt it over specifically the last number of years where it became more evident. It snuck up on everyone pre-2020, and then we realized how interdependent we are. With that, starting OSS Ventures, what gap did you see in the market that led to the founding of this group and maybe a little bit more background on the founding of your company now?
As a lot of things in my life, it happened by a combination of luck and me just thinking. I had just exited my previous startup, made some money, and I had nothing to do. And my wife told me, you need to get out. I need to do something with your life. Yeah, sure. I visited Tesla Fremont. It was the time where they had put like tents on the parking to assemble cars, which is like an interesting concept. And what I saw in that factory was so far ahead in the future compared to everything I knew. And I had visited like hundreds of factories. I thought to myself, okay, so for me, I thought, okay, I am actually in the position of a guy in the 60s who discovered the first lean factory. So you know where the world is headed in the next 20 years, and the world is not yet there. I said to myself, okay, I need to bring tech to all the factories in the West. So everyone but China. I told myself, okay, what's the best way of doing that? And turns out the best way of doing that to bring tech at scale to the world of manufacturing was creating startups. But instead of just being an investor, because it's very tough to create a startup for manufacturing, instead of being an investor, I chose to use my money and actively create all companies with the founders. And my job is basically to go to the factories, to take founders with me, to ask for pain points and look what we can do with tech. And when we have a pretty good idea, then we say, okay, let's build a company and it's free until it works for the factory. That's how it started a little over 5 years ago. Since then, we have created 22 companies. We are live in 3,000 operational sites and we have 100,000 monthly users of our solutions.
Yeah, that's scaled really nicely. And it's nice to hear from the venture standpoint and from the capital standpoint, the bridge to the operating environment. There's sometimes a gap. You see it all the time. And on shop floors, especially, something gets rolled out and implemented, but technology in the manufacturing space, there's plenty of it, but what actually works and having the eyes and ears on the ground to make sure it's being deployed correctly is a really big thing. I want to turn a little bit to what we are seeing in the US, and I think particularly in the West. I like the way you frame that, by the way, in the West. With this reshoring and realignment of supply chains in the US, calling it reindustrialization, we talk a lot on this show about those topics. From your vantage point as an investor and builder, is this cycle fundamentally different from past ones, or is this just something that kind of is cyclical and maybe we've seen it before, or we'll see it again? But what do you think is really different about it this time?
Yeah, I think there is some sameness, but also a lot of change. By the way, I hate the term reshoring. I think we should use the term new shoring because, so basically, we are out of 30 years of sending our factories abroad to countries where they don't give them about worker rights and labor cost is very low. So we need to put factories in countries who do give them about human rights. And wages are high. And so it's not the same factories, but it's also not the same products. And if we are serious about producing locally what we use, which is very important, like for everything, for our social contract, for our dependency, for our strength, if there is a war, if we are serious about that, then we need to rethink the products and the factories to go well with the current set of constraints, which is different from the set of constraints that was in the 30 years of basically delocalization. And so the new thing is, what does a factory doing mass production look like in a high wage, human rights aware country? And pretty much the answer is gigafactories, lights out factories, automated factories where basically your guys are as paid as tech companies because you achieve some level of scale. And so that's what I'm trying to build with OSS Ventures and help. But we're already seeing that. And so the ones who are winning at reshoring, nearshoring, are the ones who implement tech.
Yeah, to compete in this day and age, it's a technological advantage for sure. I like that phrase, nearshoring, because we had a guest on this show a couple weeks ago, John Gardner, and I'm going to butcher his quote, but basically implied that a post-industrial economy is actually a pre-industrial economy because it's not going back to the exact same way that it was. You look at productivity enhancements, you look at all kinds of different things from a tech standpoint, but also the muscle memory, right? That maybe people passed generationally down, or that people, that institutional knowledge, reconstituting that and building it, tech will certainly be a big building block for it. What role does geopolitics, supply chain risk, and industrial resilience play in how capital is now being allocated? Because that is something we talk about it all the time from a geopolitical level, but now people really have their eye on how they're allocating capital and what they're funding.
To us, it's a bit like climate change. The very bizarre thing is everyone knows it's important, but nobody acts on it until it bites. And so we are post-bite. The bite was 2020. And so now that people have been burnt, we are seeing a lot of innovation. A thing that we are consistently seeing is the supply chain won't change if it's too expensive to change. Like there is no premium acceptance to more local supply chains. If the cost is the same, then there is infinite preference for local. And the last thing that we are seeing is that most companies, most very big companies, they are mapping their dependencies and they are nurturing subscale players that are more expensive today. But if they scale and the supply chain get cut like without notice, then those local actors can scale. What we haven't seen right now is the full reshoring of entire supply chains that are more expensive than the alternative. We haven't seen that. There is no willingness to pay the premium.
It's always a cost question and the heat of the moment and what we could call like fog of war, because the supply chain dynamic has basically been a war for 5 to 6 years. The cost pressure is significant to firm survival. It's something that before all those things that you mentioned, labor arbitrage or finding cheaper labor and the reason for offshoring, bringing it back presents issues around margin compression and looking for alternative sourcing. And that's the feedback we've gotten on this show a lot, is that of course everybody would like to do it here or they would like to do it local, but they're looking for that cost out or that structure that they can make it happen. I think tech has a big thing to do with that and how it evolves. Do you think investors are truly committing to manufacturing, or are many still treating it like a legacy sector, or do they see it as forward-looking or more of a legacy sector?
Yeah, I have a lot of talks with investors. I tell them like out of the 4 biggest hits in venture today, 3 are hardware. What I see is counterintuitively hardware and manufacturing is actually an even more extreme version of the power law. If you are creating a new company doing cars, you're either Tesla or you're no one. And if you are producing satellites, you're Starlink or you're no one. If you're doing humanoid robots, you're Figure or you're no one. So the power law is more extreme, but it's supposed to be the job of venture capitalists. So what I see is that on the venture side, it is being invested heavily with an even more extreme power law. On the private equity side, what we are seeing is that everything touching defense just got a premium. What we are seeing also is that the actors with a longer time horizon, so family offices, institutional investors, they are starting to reinvest because they know that in the long term, probably it's a good investment because things are going to be more heavily made locally. And so it may just make sense to start to have exposure to the asset class. The thing that is not sure right now, which goes with new shoring and everything, is will that movement be captured by legacy actors versus new actors? And that's a question mark. And so I feel like a lot of institutional investors are also asking themselves what to do because they don't know who will benefit from the inevitable thing, which is we are going to make more things happen.
Yeah, that's a key part of your longer time horizon, right? The gap between the shop floor and this quarter to how do we look a couple of years out? And we'll get to that at the end of the show. But you said some very interesting things there and want to talk specifically about your group, OSS Ventures, and you're focused on creating startups, not just founding them. Why does the venture studio model work particularly well in manufacturing?
When I met some money, my wife asked me if I would consider working less. Turns out I'm working more with my new venture and my venture studio life. But at first, I just wanted to be an investor. I was picturing myself sipping coffee, like in fancy cafe, and just investing. And turns out, I truly think this doesn't really work for industrial tech for a good reason. So in the grand scheme of things, operations and manufacturing globally, if you put like logistics, warehousing, and everything, it's 37% of the global GDP. It's 0.4% of VC money. So it is usually not in the right direction. And also, it is 0.7% of all the startups created are for the world of operations. So there is a gap. There's just no deal flow. The good founders don't go to that space because of the very bad rap that manufacturing gets. And the third thing that is more important is when you do get a good founder, which is like pure luck, opening the door of a factory is like 6 to 9 months. Then doing your first iteration is 6 months more because it's hard to build in manufacturing. Let's say a startup survives to those 14 months. Okay. Then you go to the IT director. The IT director says, hey, cybersecurity and all, you need to connect to this and that before you are able to scale. So you're already 2 years in and you're very tired and you have one client. And so manufacturing has a tendency to kill startups on site. So when I realized that, because the way I went about starting my new investor life was to make 400 calls with startup founders operating in manufacturing because I like to be data rich. So when I realized that, I said, okay, my right to win as an investor is actually to destroy all those barriers to entry. So what I did is I called 100 factories and I said, hey, share with me your biggest pain points. I will do everything to be able to work with you and to have pre-vetted everything. And it's free until it works and it will be my money. So I pre-qualified a lot of things. The second thing is I hired tech people to create a basic tech project that connects to the ERP, that is basically compliant, blah, 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 blah. So I basically erased those bullshit 12 months that kill a lot of startups. And the third thing that I did is I went to the best founders and I told them, hey, do you want to create another freaking like pet food delivery app that the world doesn't need? Or do you want to save the manufacturing world? And 10% of top tier founders said, okay, I love the vision, let's go. And so I started 4 companies at start. And turns out out of those 4 companies, 3 are currently on their way or have surpassed 10 million ARR, which is like big milestone, 10 million revenue. And so I said, okay, that seemed to work. And I just iterated. And so I didn't love the venture studio model. I have no particular love for that thing, but I think manufacturing complexity, manufacturing tendency to key startups, manufacturing high cost to entry and barrier to entry, which is like cybersecurity and everything, makes it uniquely suited for the venture leader model because you basically put all the repeatable things away, all the bullshit is taken care of, and you just focus on creating value as fast as possible, which is what a startup is supposed to do.
The time to value in manufacturing is a little different than some tech startups, right? It's some folks are selling just a SaaS product, or they're selling something that maybe makes your daily life easier, but solving problems in the real world and on the shop floor is a very different dynamic. Speaking of that, what kind of problems in manufacturing operations are most ripe for a startup innovation today? Where is something, obviously with AI, there's plenty of things to look at or KPIs to address, but where do you see the most particular set of problems?
There are 3 big things that we love. The first is people with a very complex job that is just pushing data around. So planners, quality people, process engineer. When you think of a process engineer, they look at the process, they get some data, they make hypotheses, they run the machine differently and it runs better. Okay, that is literally data work that an AI agent can do. So that's the first area that excites us. We have launched quite a few companies in the space. Another that we really like is end-to-end supply chains. So a lot of the relationship between a supplier and a client is just a mail, and there's no reactivity, there's no shared data stream that allow for like global optimization instead of local optimization. So that's another area that we are really, really interested in, that we like quite a lot. And the third is what we call elevating job roles. And so elevating job roles is, for example, how to make an industrialization manager 10 times more efficient because of AI and because of the tools that he or she has. And so those are the 3 themes that we think are ripe for disruption. In the grand scheme of things, I think in 10 years, there will be like at least 40% less people, white collars in manufacturing, but they will be paid like tech people and their leverage point will be very high. And so you can pay them well. And also, I think most of supply chains will be data integrated to a level of integration that is not seen today.
That's a good time horizon window, about 10 years, because we've seen a lot of false starts in the space where people think most of the conversations around artificial intelligence that we've had on the show involve people losing their jobs to it, as opposed to being individually augmented and their productivity enhanced, which is probably more of the reality. One thing that is interesting, and I've seen a lot, not just in my role, but actually out in the real world, is that a lot of companies that build software or platforms for operations, they differ from building consumer SaaS companies. What do you think are some of the main differences? It's not just a one-for-one replacement. If you were say if you were a worker, like somebody who was in a commercial role for that, selling a consumer-based SaaS model is a little bit different than selling something to a manufacturing company. What are some of the main differences?
So the first difference is that when you do a system for a factory, you're working for the factory, not for the user. And so typically you want to create value for the system and you want the user to understand his or her role in the system and make sure that the system is good. When you sell to the user, you sell to the user, but it's a very different thing to be done. Another thing that I think is widely different is the cost of mistake. Like you cannot vibe code something for manufacturing and hope it goes right. Like vibe is not a word I've heard in a manufacturing setting recently. And so there's a certain level of discipline, responsibility, and ability to not break things that is very important in an industrial setting.
I think that's the notable quotable is that it's to the system, not the user, and definitely not a lot of vibes going on the shop floor. It's very process driven. So that's a really good point. What mistakes do founders make when they underestimate the complexity of industrial environments? I'm sure you've seen people underestimating it or maybe overestimating it. It could be more simple, but what are some of the things that you've seen out there?
One thing that is cool in manufacturing is that when you put something live, you know very soon if it works or not. If you are misjudging the complexity of something, you will know very soon. The signs of you misjudging the complexity level of something is usually the outcome will be false for a lot of reasons that you had not foreseen. And so the best founders, they have the humility to realize that this is going on. And so they go back to the shop floor and they understand the complexity. The magic thing is that when you capture the complexity, but you are able to do a superior system, industrials love it, and you can make so much money. Like one of our portfolio companies called Ovlet. Okay, they are doing agentic supply chain planning. For one of our clients, we are talking about 12 million per year recurring gains and going from 25 to 5 planner full time. And that's hard work. That's a lot of complexity. For one of the factories, the agent has 3,000 different rules that they need to follow to create an optimal planning. And you better not forget one. It took them like 4 months to really fully do the thing. But now it's live. It works. And so I think that creating software for that kind of environment require humility, thoroughness, and being mindful of the cost of mistakes. But when it does work, it's nothing short of magical.
I think it balances the world of tech optimism with shop floor reality. When you've actually achieved something and made a worker's life better, but you've enhanced the productivity of an organization, there's a lot of fulfillment in that. Similar to how there's just a lot of fulfillment in manufacturing in general because you're making and building something. Final question on this topic. From an investor's lens, how do you separate signal from the noise in industrial tech? Because that's something that in the age of artificial intelligence and automation and data, there's a lot of noise out there about what's really going to bring value to the shop floor and to the company. But how do you separate those kinds of signals and what will really work in reality?
So there's a thing that I just love about manufacturing is that they know how to pay for bets, but they won't scale something that doesn't work. So the only signal is industrials actually paying the big buck because they get the big results. You take all the AI companies, cool, hip and young, and they are very willing to speak about everything, save for one thing, which is the revenue. And so it's okay to spend 3 years because you're solving something really hard and you need some money to be able to solve the thing. But at some point, you need to solve the thing. And so everything pre-massive revenues is an hypothesis. And it's okay to have a hypothesis, but don't bullshit me and tell me you solved the thing. But then when you get to the big revenue, okay, you solved the thing. Now let's scale these things. And so I have a portfolio of 22 companies. We are having 3,000 operational sites. We are doing 41 million revenue per year and intend to double this year. So that's like a manufacturer doesn't write a 1 million check without thoroughly knowing that the return is here. And so that's the signal you're looking. Everything else is bullshit, including fundraising, founder pitch, big visions. Like all of that is good. It's important. But the only signal is industrials making a change.
That's very true of manufacturing because you're living in the very, very real world. You highlighted something earlier too that I think is really interesting in some of the macro conversations that we're having, because a lot of this is about sustainability. We talk a lot about resilience and agility, and I think sustainability plays a big factor in a lot of manufacturing environments, and not just framed as like compliance or ESG, right? But you approach it as strategic resilience on the sustainability question. Could you tell us a little more about that?
I was short sustainability before it was cool. And if your definition of sustainability is some guy paid by the government making an Excel file with CO2 or whatever and telling me things to do, then I'm out. But every single self-respecting industrial has been looking at raw material availability, quality, has been looking at disruption in their supply chain because of natural resource depletion. And every self-respecting industrial knows that this is a thing. And so we industrials, and I say we because I was briefly a factory director, so I include myself in that group. I'm very proud of that. We are very good at managing things that are hard to manage. And so sustainability and natural resource and everything should be managed this way. Okay, what is that raw material dependency? What is the cost? What is the projected cost? What are alternative materials I can use? How different is my process? Okay, what is my dependency on natural resource extraction? Okay, what is my CO2 footprint? Okay, what if CO2 gets a price and then I'm out of business? Okay, so industrials are incredibly good at managing that, but it needs to be pragmatic. It needs to be not political. And it needs to be handled by engineers and not like political science major. No offense.
Yeah, no, it's something that from an engineering standpoint, it's not compliance. It's not ESG. It's not handled by bureaucrats, right? Like if bureaucrats are making decisions, and if there's one truth, bureaucrats making decisions for people who are in the industrial space, they're often not informed. It's something that's an idea to them. It's on paper. They haven't seen a shop floor and don't realize where a lot of their stuff comes from and how you've seen that play out on geopolitically over the last couple of years. And now everybody talks about it, at least in the United States, about the inputs that go into manufacturing, energy costs being the first driver to de-inflate things, to de-inflate raw materials costs and those types of things. So the sustainability, I do like how that's matured a little bit, because 10 years ago, you would say that it would immediately be like the BlackRock ESG talk versus the shop floor manager and somebody who understands it at that level. Let's turn now, what I call, to maybe some of the free advice of the show that you could provide, or insights to our listeners, and maybe some advice to founders or operators or investors. For founders building in manufacturing, what's the most important thing they need to understand early?
The one thing I always tell to our portfolio is most startups should not exist, but you don't find out until a lot later down the road. And so for a startup to have a right to exist, you need to solve something big and important. And the more thing is, take time to go to the shop floor, take time to go there, understand what's going on, and then decide on a big thing that you will be solving. For example, that agentic planning solution. When we went to the shop floor and everything, there was a lot of Excel people running around to try and plan things. And we said, okay, we are not going to help those people with an Excel to do marginally better Excel files. We're going to have agents doing 100 times more things than those Excel people will do. And those Excel people will be in charge of managing a fleet of agents that are doing a 100x better job. And so I see always startups and startup founders failing because they don't dream big enough of a big, bold vision and solving a big thing. Intuitively, like I've been in this business for 5 years, I think it's easier to solve big problems than small problems.
That's a really good insight, because people want the solution. It's like you said, just solve regular problems may be quite transactional just because of the pace of technology. So solving the big problems, we'll pin that one. For operators, because you've been on the operations side, for operators evaluating new technology, how should they think about partnering with a startup? That's a big question in our space.
The first thing is free proof. The key is opening your doors. Like, it has more value than money. You would be like, I'm talking to industrials. You would be surprised when you have a big issue. You just try and find a startup and you say, hey, go and work for me for 6 weeks without pay, but prove to me that it works. this for pre-revenue, pre-proof startups has an immense value. You can get 2 Stanford grads for $0 sleeping on your shop floor, solving one thing for you, if you're smart about it. By the way, if you want that, I can provide the Stanford grads because that's literally my biz. So that would be for pre-proof, okay? Then for post-proof, so a startup coming and say, hey, I did for 12 clients, open your doors and show the thing. The key insight is if you really want the gains, you need to change the way you work. So for example, let's take back that agentic planning thing. The work of the planners is totally different, like totally different. So if you think you can work the same way, put some AI on top and make gains, they're going to happen. It changed the way you work. And so you need to be prepared for that, acknowledging that and actively pushing for that.
That makes a lot of sense. You can see some value before you just jump on and try to solve a problem in a hurry as opposed to thinking about it strategically. The final component of that for investors looking at industrial tech, what's one blind spot you see repeatedly?
Market size. So I'm French, as you can tell. We have a bureau in Boston and a bureau in Paris. When I went back to Paris to launch OSS Ventures, I talked to one of the top venture capital guy. And I told him, hey, I'm going to do that and blah, 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 in manufacturing. And he told me, isn't manufacturing a niche? I told the guy, okay, the chair you're on, the glasses you're wearing, the shirt on your back, literally the wall, the whiteboard, everything has been done in a factory. What? And they consistently misjudge market size. Like, for example, I was in a socks factory in Turkey last week. The sock factory, the socks business in Turkey is 9 million turnover. You can build, if you solve a top 3 issue from the socks business just in Turkey, you can build a 100 million ARR software business just for socks, just in Turkey. The market size is humongous. But for some reason, like investors say, it's a niche. What the hell, man? Just because you and your Silicon Valley friends never went to a factory doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
People have a real big disconnect about where everything is made. And the era of globalization made that very apparent that when you take away that sovereignty and it's not just the process and the products that are outsourced, but the thinking, the critical thinking about where things come from and what they actually mean is outsourced too. Looking ahead a little bit and just a few predictions before we wrap up the show. If we fast forward 10 years, and you mentioned this earlier, what will manufacturing organizations that got it right have done differently?
I think they will have had the courage of inventing things that were not existing and creating a model that is not just copy-pasting what China is doing in a totally different setup, nor just waiting for things to happen and just copying. Like, have actually the courage to invent some of the missing parts of the puzzle. I think also they will manage human capital, like with the highest regard, because AI is probably going to automate like 40% of white-collar jobs. But also the remaining jobs are going to be totally different. So you need to reskill massively everyone, and you need to take care of the human capital. And also our expertise with AI says that to really implement AI, you need to be really good at your job, because you need to tell the AI what to do. And you need to be able to tell the AI that it did some not good things. And so we think it will polarize, and we think the performance of those who manage human capital will be of the highest order.
It's a pretty big prediction, but one that seems like a natural outcome of if you're doing it the right way and decluttering the noise, that's where it all leads to. What gives you optimism about the future of manufacturing in the US and globally?
I'm more optimistic about the US than the globally. Look, I started OSS Ventures just before COVID, and I was screaming in deserts. Nobody gave a damn. COVID happened, and then suddenly everyone understood. And then the US got serious about it. There will be more factory construction in the next 5 years than in the previous 15 combined. And like, I went to Detroit to that event called Reindustrialize. There are so many young people, patriotic young people say, hey, this is the battle of a generation and we're going to win. And the best tech people, they want purpose and they want to go to the factories and they want to make America like into a powerhouse of industry, and they are very serious about it, and the capital is there and everything. And so there's all the reasons to be optimistic. And also taking a page from when Japan was doing better electronics than you guys. I think US is best when there is one very annoying country that is doing something better than the US, and then the US in 10 years gets like far ahead. And so I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's really, very optimistic, and something that as an American, yes, it does get under your skin until you decide to do something about it. That's probably the nature of manufacturing. Are we going to do something about it or not? That's a really good point. Final question. Where should capital, talent, and policy align to ensure that long-term industrial strength? Because one thing we do talk a lot about on the show is an industrial policy. There's people that want to do it, just like those folks you saw at that Reindustrialize conference. The talent's there, the capital seems to be there, and now where's the start? Where does it play to that strength?
When you look at what happened with Japan, the government set up guidelines and like very predictable avenue for capital and saying this is there and everything. The space race also aligned a lot, all the technology. So there is a central rule of providing some long-term guidance and some predictable avenue for capital allocation and revenue, saying, hey, for the next 15 years, this is what's going to happen. Because industrial strength happen at best 5, but already 10 years to 15 years time frames. You need to rebuild entire supply chain. You need to reskill like 5% of the US population. Like this is massive. And so to be able to do that, you need some kind of long-term thinking. The long-term capital is already aligned. Like I talk routinely with investment funds, with pension funds, with family offices. They are acutely aware that this is a 10 to 15 years timeframe thing. And they are aligning on that. I think government can do a better job of providing some like clear guidelines and like kickstarting that. On that thing, I have to say the CCP 50-year plan and 5-year plan are very powerful tool because it aligns a whole society on those are the things, just do the things. And I think we'll get to a part where this is very clear and this aligns capital, talent, service.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the CCP, famous for the central planning, but sometimes the execution and some of the other bigger things. I think one thing about the West in particular is that all that's there, all the components are there. Is there alignment, and is there enough to drive it to being the dominant force in the 21st century? And we're just at the start of it, really. I guess we're a quarter of the way in, but really the shape of the next 50 to 75 years is just now taking off. Renan, where can our listeners find out more about what you're doing and more about OSS and your thoughts on the manufacturing space?
Sure. So you can find us on our website, oss.ventures. You can hit me by email, by Twitter, and also I write about reshoring or newshoring, as I like to call it, and everything. So you can find us on Medium. We have a weekly newsletter.
Excellent. Thank you very much for coming on the show today. And it's been a fantastic conversation. And we're looking forward to what the year has in store for you.
Thank you, Matt.
For listeners, we'll link to OSS Ventures and Renan's work in the show notes. And if you're a founder, operator, or investor thinking seriously about the future of manufacturing, it's a voice worth following. To stay ahead of the curve and to help plan your strategy, please check out our website at variableops.com and under the resources section titled Trump 2.0, where you can see the framework around upcoming administration policies and how they will impact you as a manufacturer. If you're on socials, give us a follow on LinkedIn, X, Truth, or Instagram. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube and leave us a rating, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for joining us and learning more about how you can make your way.